And so I've got a couple of ideas that I wanted to check with you, in front of everybody on a podcast, because that's how
Well,
you run you do your material. What do you think? But I want to do it.
as your black friend?
No, see,
Okay.
I
You knew it was coming. Okay,
darn it,
here we go.
I couldn't get ahead of it fast enough. I
Very good.
almost hit your mute because I knew that was coming. Hey there. If you've joined the podcast today, my name is Chris Jarvis. I work with companies on employee giving and volunteering programs.
And my name's Jake McIsaac. I spend a lot of time thinking about public safety and restorative justice.
So we are having conversations here that we've been having for 20 years.
Yeah, the only difference now is we press record and share it with you.
Thanks for joining us.
On today's episode, Chris tells me a story about a person who was taking way more bread than they were supposed to at the Sunday suppers.
And Jake's going to share a story with me that I had never heard before and a question I'd never asked. And I'm a little surprised, both that I'd never asked it before and his response was interesting.
We're talking in-group, out-group. We're talking about belonging. We're talking about the brain, covering a lot of ground today in this episode.
Yeah, and how social exclusion creates pain. So sticks and stones may break your bones, but so will words, spoken or not. Jake, do you remember this incident? It came to my mind because of a presentation I'm doing tomorrow. But one of the organizers at the Sunday suppers in Halifax came to me one day and said that she had a big concern about. Now, obviously, who can forget, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if I've ever shared the story with you, or maybe I did.
Okay, go ahead.
It was a long time ago.
I don't remember it right now, but maybe it'll kick in.
Okay, so for the listeners, was a interesting personality who Jake and I both consider a friend. Just a little bit of background information for you, which she shares with whoever's interested. She had a rough upbringing, was one of 12 children in her family, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She had some issues growing up. She grew up in a family affected by generational poverty. And at one point in an argument with her mom, she tried to burn down the house. So they called the police and she went to jail. And that was a whole experience. Had her first baby. I think she was 13,
12?
maybe 12 or 13. Yeah. By one of the prison guards.
Mm-hmm.
And which we never knew if it was actually true or not, because she, by the time we knew her, she was in her 40s. I actually don't know how old. And she had teeth problems. So the healthcare in Canada, if you're affected by poverty or living on the street or whatnot, you just pull the teeth and all the teeth and give you dentures. And she didn't wear the dentures all the time. So it was kind of hard to hear her. And anyways, in and out of prison, dealing with drugs and addiction, had a hard life, lived a hard life, has way more stories than I think we could ever cover in a year of podcasts. But when I met her, and I think we covered this on another podcast. Do you remember did we ever talk about
I don't think we did. No.
No? Okay. And the way I met her, just again, for everybody listening, I was at Sunday suppers and I was with Jake, and we were there was several of us that we were in charge of kind of making this meal go. It was for about 150 people off the streets, men, women, kids, families that would come in, and we would bring in a number of guests. It had been going since 1985, started by 7 little old ladies, part of the women's auxiliary there. And we turned it around, grew it a little bit, had more volunteers coming in. One of the volunteers was who showed up with a piece of paper and said, "Are you in charge?" And I said, "Sure." She said, "Okay, I have 1,000 hours." And I said,
"Community service, yeah.
Community service hours." I said, "What?" Because you don't get 1,000 community hours, right? Like maybe 40, 50, 100, 200, maybe, but 1,000? I had never heard of this before. But I think the judge was just fed up with, sending her to jail for dumb things. And so she said, "You're my boss. I'm working here. I'm going to work on these 1,000 hours." Now, at 2 hours a week, it was going to take a bit of time.
Yeah.
10 years, something like that. I think about 10 years to get through all those hours if she didn't miss a Sunday. And I said, "Sure." And she became a great volunteer. She understood the community that we were serving. She was such a hard worker. Do you remember? She was always finding something to do, finding a way to help,
Yeah.
participate, very generous, sharing her time.
That's what I was gonna say, just to interrupt. So, I mean, it painted a truthful but really sad picture of who was, but I think
Yeah,
it
that's
is,
right.
and
That's right. Yeah. Can you fill in some blanks? Because that
one thing that
yeah,
stands out when I think of is probably one of the most generous people I have
right.
ever met.
Absolutely.
And the amount of generosity when you don't have a lot, she's giving, often at her own expense. Not like sometimes like I might give, like I have a little bit of extra, so it's not going to really hurt me. I'll just give you a little of my excess, a little
Right.
extra money.
Right.
Would dig down and make sure that everybody was okay. Was the
Right.
person in the community who would say, if you knew where to get a one turkey dinner, you go and would make sure everybody on the street knew, right? Like
Yes.
she was the hookup person and took care of
She was.
people.
She looked after her community. She hooked them
Yeah,
up. In fact, that turkey story, one year, I guess she's done this for a couple years, but one year she was telling me how she got 25 turkeys for her friends.
right.
And her friends are her community people who are
Mhm.
uh, dealing with the same kind of issues as she was. And 25 turkeys. How did you find those? Well, you just call up a church and give them a new name. Then you go pick it up and then you deliver them. So she was weirdly an intermediary bringing turkeys to folks who wouldn't have been able to get to the church and get them.
Making it
Um,
super accessible. I mean,
Super accessible.
she was doing this inclusion work long before
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's
we
right.
had language around it. She knew that there were some people in that community that just would never, for their own reasons, darken the door of that church or go there or couldn't go, or maybe they were banned from this
Exactly.
particular charity or outreach center. So she just worked around it to make sure that they
She just
still could get their turkey. She just
absolutely.
navigated it. I loved it. I love that about her.
I did too. I thought that was great. And a number of the volunteers were like, "Oh my gosh, she's working the system." I thought, "Yeah,
Mhm.
but she should. Somebody should because the system's not working."
Right.
So she's stepping in to make it okay. So with that in mind, and given the facts of her history, kind of thing,
Mhm.
one of the other organizers came to me and said, "Yeah, I have a concern. Can I talk?" I said, "Sure." She said, "So goes in after the Sunday suppers is over to the freezer and takes all of the frozen bread." Now you have to understand, Jake. You and I picked up the
Yeah.
bread. It was like on its last legs, anyways. We froze
Yeah.
it. It was like it wasn't like stone hearth fresh bread
No.
home. Okay, and they're muffins, chocolate muffins
Mhm.
from Costco. They were prize, and she takes all of them. And I said, "Oh, is that a problem?" She said, "Well, they're for everybody. They're not just for her." I said, "Well, okay. Does she take them before everybody gets theirs?" No, she takes just we give it what we can, and then whatever's left, she cleans out the freezer, and it's not for her.
Mhm.
I said, "Okay, I'll talk to her about it." So I wasn't too concerned because I was sure there was a story behind it. And so I was driving and I said, "You got 5 bags of bread there. What are you going to do with all that bread?" "I'm going to give it out to all my friends."
Mhm.
"What?" Yeah, there's a bunch of people who can't get the Sunday supper. So I bring them stuff afterwards. And I helped her lug it up and I walked into the living room. Now, you and I had just moved about
Mhm.
3 months earlier, a big, stupid couch into her apartment building. I
Yeah.
said, where's the couch? We lugged up the stairs. That was a
That
beast.
heavy, yeah.
Uh, My Joey, whatever his name was, got out of prison last month. He didn't have any furniture, so I took it
Yeah,
down to him.
yeah.
She loved that couch. We
Mhm,
fought hard to get it up those stairs. She just gave it
mhm.
away because he
Yeah.
didn't have anything. And so I went back and explained it to the other person. They were like, "Okay, fine. If that's really what's happening, fine." Now, this other person is incredibly astute, works with people on the street, has decades of experience, was well informed, taught me a lot.
Mhm.
But in this moment, she fell into an othering trap.
Yeah.
And based on how she perceived herself and the world, it called into question. It not only called into question, but there was sort of an assumption of something's wrong.
Yeah, no, 100%. I didn't know that, that's where you're going. I do remember that now, but I'm glad I mentioned about, the generosity of Marguerite because that is what I remember about Marguerite
Right.
completely, is that,
That's right.
she wanted to make sure that people around her were okay.
Right.
And there was this othering in that moment. I think you're right that the organizer didn't recognize her motives, didn't recognize the way she was helping, or even the actions.
Didn't recognize is a great way to say that,
But
actually,
yeah,
because
but
it's not how she would have done it. The other
to not
woman
how
would have
she
done
would have done it,
it. Yeah.
right? But Mark was taking care of her in group,
Yeah.
and making sure that no one was left behind. And this was, when she did well, everybody in her circle was going to do well. I,
Yes.
th- there's this sense of loyalty and generosity that kind of go together that make that community work well. And I remember when you talked about the harms that she had experienced as a child, and then being incarcerated as a juvenile, and there was a payout. And you'll remember, in Nova Scotia, there was a
Yeah.
lot of folks who were paid a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars as a class settlement
Yeah.
because of the harms that they experienced in the victimization, institutionalized victimization, in state-run facilities, and how fast that money was gone,
It's gone.
and
Yeah.
how she agonized about how to spread that money around. And I
Yeah.
think we were worried. I think we had conversations initially, not dissimilar to the other organizer, where we were trying to say, "I've got to protect this money. This is a lot of
Yeah.
money. You're going to have to
Yeah.
make different decisions." And all she could do was give this away to make sure everyone around her was okay.
Yeah.
It just didn't make sense to you or me. It's
Yeah.
because it's not how we would have done. We would have
Nope.
invested some of this, and maybe you put a little down payment on a house, none of that made sense because it didn't take care of our community.
Because you and I had a right way to see money based
Right.
on how we were
Yeah.
raised and where we were in society, right?
Yeah, I think about that often as a way to check myself about other people's motives or decisions they make, and try not to be too judgy about it, because I remember the relief that she expressed to us when that money was gone. She
Mm.
could have her normal life back.
Mhm.
She didn't have to
Mhm.
try to, what would I do with $80,000?
Mhm.
I would get rid of it really quick so I could get back to my life and my relationship. That's what happened.
So I was thinking about this
Mm,
story
mm,
because of what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. I'm not gonna use that story, but I'm talking, to the Greater Washington Urban League, at the summit, the great group. I'm back for the second year, and I get to, we're trying to talk about how to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in society, but in particular in the workplace, achieve their intended results. Are we more inclusive? Is there more diversity? Is it more equitable? So on the diversity and equitable, obviously there's been marginal progress. Some firms have leapt ahead and they're more visibly diverse. The women are almost being paid as much as
mhm,
men for the same roles, kind of thing. And there's more women in senior roles. So there's some increase, but that increase, if you look at the 600 firms right now that we know of that are doing DEI work with
right,
companies, and you
right.
look at an annual $8 billion investment in it, both
Mhm,
inside and with these other firms, whatnot, you sort of ask the question: Is 2 or 3 percentage points enough? Like,
mhm,
where's all the value actually going?
right.
And, so that's what we're because we don't wanna go through all of this work and then have all of the systems and processes in place so we can check all the boxes and say, "We look more diverse, we are more equitable," but inside individuals, we're still holding on to all of the same biases, implicit racism, because as we've never been asked to deal with that. We just deal with the way we work and the way we measure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real vulnerability when you just get to frontline folks to say, "So how does it feel to work here, person of
Yeah,
color?"
right. Has anybody ever asked you that?
No, well, not formally. I mean, I
No.
think we get every once in a while, and I've done this in a couple different places I've worked, so it's not just with my current employer, but they'll send out a survey once a year. The survey questions aren't bad, but they don't get to how well do I think we're doing on our commitments in terms of EDI, or it's mostly Are you aware of this initiative? Do you
Yeah.
know that we have this policy?
Yeah.
We're thinking,
Yeah.
and so it's soliciting feedback, and it's
Yeah.
not bad, but it doesn't really say in a way that asks me to reflect on, is any of this making a difference
Right.
for me?
Exactly. Yes.
Does
Yeah.
any of this make a difference on the
Yeah.
everyday for when I show up to my workplace as a person of color? Do I feel more included? Do I feel like my voice matters? Am I code switching? And we can do a whole another episode on that where do I have to change who I am and how I show up?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I remember you mentioning. Can you just explain code switching really quickly? Because now
Yeah,
people are like, "What is code switching?"
code switching. It's learning how to navigate and how to make yourself a little bit more accessible to the audience. And so there's a really great example of that using President Obama, where he's
Okay.
greeting a whole bunch of folks at the White House, and he's going down and he's shaking hands, shaking hands, shaking hands. He gets to the person of color, and they immediately see each other. He dabs them up, fist bump, pulls them in for a hug, and then switches right back to going down to meeting people where they are and what they need in that moment to feel connected. But it's very different in the way he's interacting with people. In this moment,
Right.
this code switch is like
Yeah.
the the president lets his guard down and is seen by another black man in this moment.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? And it started a lot of conversations around it. That'd be an example I would give. But we
Yeah.
can
Oh,
do a
that's good.
whole
Okay. Yeah,
episode on
we should dig into that because that is really interesting.
it. Yeah.
Um, and so I've got a couple of ideas that I wanted to check with you, in front of everybody on a podcast, because that's how
Well,
you run you do your material
mhm.
is this, what do you think? But I want to do it.
As your black friend?
No, see,
Okay.
I
You knew it was
gosh
coming.
darn
Okay,
it,
here we go.
I couldn't get ahead of it fast enough. I
Very good.
almost hit your mute because I knew that was coming. So I've been reading even more than usual on this
Mhm.
topic, and a couple of interesting things. Okay, so here's the setup. I'm going to ask you some questions. You tell me
Okay.
what you think. Okay.
Okay.
So I read this article in HBR. It's going to be in the show notes. This gentleman's doing some great work around trying to grapple with diversity, in particular, Black executives is one of his tracks
Okay.
because it's Harvard. So of course it's
Yep.
executives. And he found that in interviewing them, that they did not. These are his words. They did not necessarily feel safe to be themselves. They did not necessarily feel seen, and they also felt like they lacked some support.
Mm. Okay.
Eh, Okay, so and given that, it meant that they were experiencing this othering aspect. So, just for everybody listening, because Jake and I talk about this all the time, social identity theories, and as well as some other disciplines in the humanities, would suggest that we know who we are because we know who we're not.
Right.
Right. So this is a combination of your DNA, like just how you came into the world. Okay. Your social context, where you are socioeconomically in the world, kind of thing. And then affinities, like
Mhm.
the particular location, like Baltimore versus Halifax, kind of thing. Right. And the more affinity I share with the other person, the more likely I am to see them as my people or in my group. And so fundamentally with DEI, it feels like there's a problem here. And I want to know what you think about this, because even though we're addressing all the systems, more people of color, training around microaggressions, gender norming language, implicit bias, how you deal with it, how you manage to be more inclusive, on all these kinds of trainings, and then appropriately lists and goals, and then measuring and reporting against that. That's all great, but it doesn't actually affect the way I internally process how I perceive another person. And none of those things can change the sort of default setting that I got born with. So no matter how much I go through that stuff, I still am always, because of the wiring in my brain, I'm always going to say, yeah, but I'm not them, those
Right.
people. And the Black executives, actually in this interview, felt like they had to sort of put on there's a way to be at work, and then there's a way to be at work with your own people in an employee resource group if they're all Black, and then there's a way to be out of work.
Mhm. Mhm.
But they had to keep switching back and forth in order to feel like they were participating or being included. But even then, not safe, not seen, not supported.
So there's a ton of stuff there, but let me just start. You've got my mind going in a bunch of different. And I want to tell
Okay.
you a quick story at the end
Okay.
of this, but if I start with the training piece, what you've got me thinking about is with in group out group. There's no way to learn that without other people. We deeply need to do that in group work. So
Mm,
if you're doing because it's a process. So good learning, uh, um, sort of good adult pedagogy is that if we're bringing people together to learn together to see it, this is we talk a lot about this. You need to have this rational discourse. You need to be able to talk to other people. You need to be able to see this through the eyes of other people, hear
right.
through the ears of other people, hear their
Right.
stories. But also, if done well, you're hearing your words through the lips of others. So you're
Right.
making
Right. Right.
connections, right? So it's not
Hmm.
just hearing their stories, but hearing that they're hearing you, right? So really connecting. And so in order for there's a lot of things that you could probably log into a online self-serve kind of training module. I think about workplace hazardous materials. That's how we do WMIS training. We get people to look at labels and pick out a multiple choice, and at the end of it, I'll get a certificate that says that I'm WMIS trained because I don't need another person to do that. I can just walk through the steps and it will teach me something, but it doesn't turn that information into knowledge. And so what I need to do that is I need to be doing that
You mean, and by turn it into knowledge, you mean like
something I can use applied.
applied
Right.
understanding, like you can know it, but just how to use it in the
Yeah,
world,
I
right?
can know and recognize,
Right.
but I haven't internalized it. I haven't practiced this out. I haven't
Exactly.
struggled with it. I've just
Right.
it's route memorization.
Right. I can read about how to play football, but until I get on the field and actually run down the field, I don't actually know how to play football.
Right. So the very first thing that when you're talking about seen, safe, and supported, if those are the things I think good training must resist doing that as individual learning. It's also can't be that when someone messes up, it can't be you send the bad person who messed up off to get quote unquote sensitivity trained.
Right.
So we because we're just imagining that this is something you can learn on your own and suddenly it'll all make sense. So we need other people.
That's a command and control
Right.
structure, right? Like you break that if you misbehave, you're gonna get your comeuppance kind of thing,
Right.
which
So
in this case is re-education, I guess.
it's re-education or it's a tick the box. It means that we sent you out to get better at this one thing because you were deficient.
Which is that's important for yes, exactly.
The deficiency
Compliance.
was you,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
fails to look at what about us contributed to that. What
Right.
about the
Yeah,
place?
yeah,
What
yeah,
about the
yeah.
culture? What about the ways? Okay, so set that aside for
That's
one
good.
second
That's a good
about
point.
the training. The thing about safe, supported, and seen, I've experienced this. So I am part of a group called the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Agencies. It's Canadian and US. It's probably broader than that, but generally they have these gatherings and they bring together senior administrators of campus security and campus police departments across the US and Canada. And when you show up on the very first day, or at least this is how previous conferences were, you have to sort of pick out your workshops, right? And then you pick out your events. And one of those things is there's a series of meetings, and there's the police chiefs meeting, and
Yeah.
you can only pick one of these, but you can pick the police chiefs, you can pick black police chiefs or
Oh
female police
no.
chiefs.
Oh no. I mean,
But let me
oh no, is
well,
that good? I automatically went with, well, wait,
that's exclusionary.
there's the main one, there's a real one, and then there's 2 for like, it feels like the kids' table, but I think it's probably appropriate to have I don't know, tell me, how did
Well,
that come across?
to your Harvard Business Review article, there might be
Yeah,
something to be seen, safe, and supported. And so when I click
yeah,
the Black police chiefs track, at least for that module, there's something that I can go and be vulnerable in that room and be seen and be safe
right.
and supported with folks who have a similar experience, I could go into that room and say, "Hey, folks, does it ever get easier? I'm younger in my career than some of the
Yeah.
other folks in this room. Does it ever get easier where you don't feel like you're just pushing back against, you just got the job because you're Black? Does
Right.
anyone else feel that? Like, I kind of
Right.
feel like this imposter thing every once in a while." And I
Yeah.
could say that in that room that I could never say
Right.
in the other room. So
Right.
I wonder, and I don't know the article well enough that you've cited, but maybe I'll take a peek at it later in the show notes. Is that who do you have to be safe, supported, and seen by? So
Oh, that's a
if
yeah,
I'm
that's a good
expecting my
question.
whole uh, work group to do that stuff for me, then I'm actually, if they can't rise to the occasion, I'll be in a deficit position. However, if I can find it somewhere, maybe maybe that helps me stay connected to the work that I'm doing. Does that make sense? Like in my workplace, so long
It
as I have
does, but
another table where I can go and see that, it might not be a forever thing, but it's a difference to say, what will make this current experience less harmful until we can transform it? So the difference between reform and transformation.
yeah, those are some I don't know if I have a good response to any of that. Those are really good questions. It does make me wonder, though, if diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts will ever result in a room full of people that if we'll ever overcome our evolutionary wiring to
Mhm.
identify based on gender, height, eye color, skin color, interests, jobs, all of that weird stuff. And for those of you who are interested, social identity theory, you can other people based on the most bizarre things. And we do it all the time. I live in a city and I support this team. You live in a city and you support that team. And if you're a real sports fan, you can get quite emotional about your team. But the team here in Baltimore came from Indianapolis. Like, I don't like, they're not
Mhm.
really, objectively speaking, they're not all from Baltimore. You know what I mean? They just represent us. And so it is, would we ever, so the question was, would we ever get to a place where we can overcome that and all go to one room and ask those kinds of questions without the default of a subset? Do you, does that
Yeah,
make
well,
sense?
it's probably further off than we would like to imagine because it's probably evolutionary.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
right? I think this is our brains. This is hardwiring. This is not something that is just about a learning gap. You talked about our being us being hardwired to need other groups, and so to understand who we are because we
Yeah.
recognize the other. There isn't a training module that makes that not happen.
Yeah, no, there isn't. It's only experience, and that goes to that study that was done after World War II that looked at soldiers, black soldiers who were in black units fighting World War
Mhm.
II, and black soldiers who were integrated into with whites, and they were one unit together. That latter group had far more cohesion and stayed friends afterwards.
Yeah,
The other one didn't. They were both military. They both went to war together, but they didn't have the experience together. And so the default setting stayed intact. Whereas with the second group, their brains actually changed. They perceived the black soldiers as them,
yeah.
as in their group.
Yeah, because the exclusion, even if it's passive, but we still practice these very intentional ways, and we convince ourselves that it leads to public safety. We when we
What othering leads to public safety? Like,
Well, it can. I mean, to your point, we do practice some exclusion, and we tell ourselves that it's in the interest of public safety.
right.
It's in the interest. So when in Canada, somewhat, but definitely in the U.S., where you're jailing people at astonishing rates and
Hmm.
sometimes for their natural lives. And then
Hmm.
within that othering, separate from society. Within, we can spend a whole lot of time talking about the criminal code in Canada, Section 718, that has this one phrase in it around sentencing that the judge must consider upon sentencing. if they need, that they will separate this offender from society where necessary.
Hmm.
That is a huge conversation about. I get that they're trying to make a decision that a person can't be here. It's not safe for you to be with us. We have to put you out almost like a scapegoat. We need someone to blame. We need someone to be away from us. It no longer defines us. The risk is what's happening now to that person. And I think we have some better insight now, thanks to neuroscience, about what's happening for that person who's being excluded.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a form of torture, right? Solitary confinement is considered a form of torture, but
But why?
as human beings degrade, like our brains stop getting this I was listening to this one podcast, this guy's in a cell, it's like 5 by 5
Mhm,
in maybe it's 6 by 6, but he can just lay down in it. It's a minor offense. He tried to escape once, but he's in Texas. Texas practices solitary confinement without limit. 25 years. He sees guards a couple times a year. I mean, this gentleman is just destroyed. The post-traumatic stress disorder that after 25 years, he'll never function. We've just ripped a human being to pieces, and that can't be put back together. But that's part of the legal code. We're allowed to do that to human beings.
well, I mean, I think that legal system moves very slowly, and so they're stuck using practices that they've always used. We've always
Right,
separated people. We've always put them
right,
away. But I think the
right.
developments in neuroscience to be able to look at brain imaging and say, you're actually shutting down parts of this brain. You're causing pain when you isolate people. You're if this person ever gets out, you have created the monster that you thought you
Yeah,
were protecting us from,
yeah.
because
That's a great.
you've shifted their brain in such a way that has actually led us to not be safe
Yeah,
anymore
that's a
because
great
they can no
observation.
longer see us. They don't feel like us. They feel like an other. And so now you've released an other who will only read us as threat because you've divided the world into us and them.
Yeah, American foreign policy may be a big othering too, like as well, where every intervention seems to spawn hundreds of problems. Um, but we won't go down that train. I want to bring it back to DEI just
Mhm,
because we're almost out of time. And I just want to bring it back to say this presentation tomorrow. One of the interesting things, and it underscores the point that you were just making, and that is excluding people does create pain. Namely, Eisenberger did some studies back in 2010, 2011,
yeah.
where and I know you've watched this video. It was
Mhm.
really interesting, but the result, she had people go through, sit on it. Actually, I think they put on goggles and they watched or they played with.
They
There were
played.
two other like little avatars. I think they're like
Mhm.
triangles or something like that. No, little people throwing a ball back and forth, and they were playing, and then all of a sudden the other two leave that person out, and they're watching what happens in the brain. And the same system that registers physical pain, parts of it lit up for social pain.
Yeah.
So being excluded, and that's the name of the podcast. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but so can your words.
Yeah.
And exclusion does cause physical pain, so much so that when they gave people Tylenol, they felt less pain. The brain calmed down. So you can use Tylenol to treat a broken leg. Well, maybe a heavy duty Tylenol. And
I feel like we need a disclaimer so we don't get sued.
you can use a Tylenol for physical pain
Right.
and for a bad day at work when you don't feel like you could bring your full self to work. Like, you can say what you were really thinking. Okay, and so this is my last question. Have you found yourself in a place where you had to put up some kind of buffer so that you weren't perceived as black versus me when I may lose my temper and yell or whatever, but nobody says, "Oh, that's just those that's how they deal with it." I never get that. It's
Yeah.
always,
Constantly.
"Wow, you lost." Yeah, what was wrong that day kind of thing. But how about you?
Constantly. It's not just a can I remember a time. This is a ongoing all the time. You're I am constantly trying to navigate that tension.
Yeah.
Um, and I work in an environment in terms of campus safety where sometimes there can be high conflict moments, and you know, I'm consciously thinking about, is this going to be read as an angry black man? Right? If I have to get loud, if I have to tactically,
I don't think you've ever said that to me before. I didn't know. I've never asked the question.
so we would have, we sometimes call it tactical communication. Like if I have
Yeah.
to cut through and really let you know that I'm serious about this thing, you need
Yeah.
to do this and you need to do this now. And some of my colleagues probably don't think about that. They're just giving commands. And I'm,
That must shape the entire way you work, like your entire
oh yeah,
like at a very deep level, how you live.
it does, but it's why that other room is so important at the Chiefs conference.
Gotcha.
It's why that other room matters, so that I can be seen safe and supported. When I can walk in and tell folks that, I don't have to tell them that whole story that I just have to tell you, where you're like, oh, I get it. I could start that. And they're like, yep, because that's what seen safe and supported feels like. Now, someday, maybe my other colleagues who are not black might get there, but they're not there
Right.
now. That's okay.
So this brings us back to the opening illustration of President Obama. That's that moment where you can just, I see you.
I see you.
I see all of you.
Yeah,
You're not just one more person in line. Not that he wasn't saying I see you to everybody else, but they expected to be seen,
right.
right?
They're always seen,
They're always seen. I'm
but he
always
saw
seen.
them, and this goes back to our initial conversation about Mark, how a person is seen and how a person is read.
Right.
In that moment, mattered a lot to that organizer. If you misread a person, you risk cutting off all of the people that they're taking care of. Imagine
Oh,
if
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
didn't
That's a good.
you didn't chase down those questions. Imagine if you
Yeah.
didn't take a few minutes and you just reacted and said, "No more. You are not going to take any more bread. You're not going to take any more muffins."
Exactly. No, to her credit, she didn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
She asked me to check out what was going on. So I guess
but
that is an upside.
yeah, but I think the risk is not everyone does that. Sometimes they just read them wrong
And act.
and
Yeah.
act. And the consequence would be not just to Marguerite, but to everyone who was relying on Marguerite.
Yeah. Wow. I hadn't thought of that angle. All right. This is great. I appreciate it. I've got some good stuff to take with me tomorrow to the group. And I'm looking forward to that. And thanks, Jake, for working this out with me and for everybody for listening to us do it publicly.
All good.
All right.
Good luck tomorrow, bud.
Thank you. See you next time.
Bye.
This
has been
a Podstarter
production.